Wyoming Territory, July 1881. The sun was already high when Luther Vance rode into Bitter Creek, his saddle creaking beneath him, dust thick on his boots and coat. He had not meant to stop, not really. He had planned on passing through just like he always did. But something about the way the town sat under the sky, quiet and stubborn, made him pull the reins and slow the horse to a walk. He had not felt much in the past 5 years. Not since Coldwater Ridge. Not since the fire and the war and the grave that bore his brother's name. He tied his horse near the mercantile, wiped a hand down his face, and turned toward the sound of crying. It came from the alley behind the blacksmith's, thin and small. A child's cry. He paused, jaw tightening, but his boots moved anyway, crunching gravel as he stepped into the narrow shade. She was there on her knees, skirt torn at the hem, arms wrapped around a baby boy who could not have been older than 2. Her hair was dark and tangled, her face flushed with heat and fear. The child screamed and clung to her, his little hand curled in her blouse. "Back off," she snapped before he even got close. "I'm not here to hurt you," Luther said, low and level. "Heard the boy crying, that is all." She blinked at him, lips trembling. She looked like she had not slept in days, maybe longer. "I do not need your help. Looks like you might." "I said I do not," the woman swayed, and Luther took one fast step forward as she nearly collapsed. The baby wailed louder. "Damn it," she whispered, cradling her son tight. "I just need water." Luther took off his coat and laid it on the ground, then crouched beside her. "Let me carry him, just to the pump. You can walk beside me, that is all." She hesitated and then slow, reluctant nodded. The boy reached out immediately, grabbing Luther's worn shirt with a tiny fist. Luther froze. The child's eyes were brown, wide, confused. His little lips stuck out like he was about to cry again. "Dada," the boy asked softly. The woman gasped. "No, no, baby, that is not." Luther's breath caught. He had not heard that word in years. Not since his brother's little girl, not since "I am not," he started. But the boy just tucked his head under Luther's chin and sighed, like he had found something he had been looking for. The woman stared at them both, silent. Her name was Roseanna James, and she had walked over 60 miles on foot from Sweetwater, carrying her son and running from something she would not name. They sat under the town's only tree, the boy asleep across her lap now. Luther had gotten her food, water, and a blanket from the general store. She still had not told him why she was running. "You do not owe me anything," he said after a while, "but if someone's after you, you should know this town does not take kindly to trouble." "I am not trouble," she said. He believed her, and the boy, he asked, "His name is Valor." She brushed a hand over the child's curls. "He is all I have left." Luther watched the way her fingers shook. "You married?" he asked. She looked at him then, eyes tired. "No," he nodded once. Roseanna pressed her lips together. "His father was a ranch hand. Left before I even knew I was pregnant. I never saw him again." Luther looked down. Valor had curled one hand around the edge of his coat. "He called me Dada. I am sorry. Do not be." Luther shifted, pulled a piece of straw out of the dry ground. "He is just a baby, does not know what it means." Roseanna looked at him for a long moment. "I think he does," she said quietly. Luther was not the kind of man who got involved. Not anymore. He had done his time army scout, cattle wrangler, small-time sheriff in a town that no longer existed. Now he kept to himself, rode alone, did not speak unless he had to. But that night, he found himself standing outside the boarding house where Roseanna and Valor had taken a room. He had offered to pay for it. She had refused. The innkeeper, an older woman named Me, had taken one look at Roseanna's face and waved the money off. He was not sure what pulled him there. Maybe the sound of Valor's laughter through the open window. Maybe the low hum of Roseanna's voice as she sang him to sleep. "Damn it," he muttered and walked away. The next morning he found her sweeping the porch of the boarding house, Valor balanced on her hip. "You need work," he said. She looked at him sideways. "You offering?" "I know a ranch outside town. Widow there needs help with chickens and gardens." "She lost 2 sons in the war. She will not mind the baby." "I can work," Roseanna said quickly. "I am not afraid of hard labor." "I figured." They walked to the ranch together. Valor toddled beside them, holding Luther's hand like it had always been his. 3 weeks passed. Luther came by most mornings. Sometimes he brought eggs. Sometimes he just stood at the fence and watched Roseanna work. Valor ran to him every time. First word out of his mouth, Dada, every time, without fail. Luther stopped correcting him. He started staying longer, fixing fences, hauling feed, listening to Roseanna laugh. One afternoon, as the sun sank low, she brought him cold coffee and stood beside him while he repaired a broken gate. "My boy loves you," she said. Luther looked at her, then at the boy playing in the dust. "I am not his father." "No," she said, her voice soft. "But you are the only man who has ever stayed." Luther swallowed hard. "I lost everything," he said. "My brother, my faith, my place in the world. I did not think there was anything left in me." Roseanna reached out and touched his arm. "You were wrong," she said. He looked at her hand, then up at her face. "I think I was." That night, Valor curled up between them on the porch bench, head resting on Luther's thigh. Roseanna leaned against his shoulder. "I never thought I would trust anyone again," she whispered. "Me neither." She looked up. "But I do." Luther turned to her, his eyes steady. "So do I." And when she kissed him, slow and gentle, he let himself feel it, all of it, and he knew his heart was not gone, it had just been waiting. The rain came soft that evening, a slow hush over the prairie grass and cottonwoods behind the widow's ranch. It tapped steady on the roof as Luther stood in the barn doorway, watching Roseanna hang damp linens over the stall rails. Her sleeves were rolled past her elbows, and the hem of her dress was dark where the earth had soaked through. She worked without looking up, her hands sure and quiet. "Didn't figure you for someone who'd take to ranch work," Luther said. She glanced over, no smile, just calm. "Did you think I'd wilt? I thought you were tired." "I am," she said, "but I still have to live." He stepped forward, brushing water from his hat. "Let me finish that." She passed him the last sheet without hesitation. "Valor's napping." "Me's watching him." Luther nodded, draping the cloth over the rail. It smelled of soap and something faintly sweet, maybe rosewater. He didn't ask, she didn't offer. "I used to sew for a living," she said suddenly. "Before, took in mending, some dressmaking. I was good at it." "Why'd you stop?" No one in Sweetwater wanted clothes from a girl living alone with a child and no ring. He didn't speak. The barn settled quiet around them, except for the rain. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" she asked after a moment. He shrugged. "Used to. Thought I'd go to Oregon, maybe north, never did." "Why not? Didn't seem to matter where I went. I'd still be me." She leaned back against the stall door. "And who is that?" "I don't know anymore." Roseanna didn't try to answer for him. Instead, she picked up a basket and moved to the tack room, and he followed because he didn't want to be anywhere else. Inside, the smell of leather and oil filled the space. She set the basket down and turned toward him. Her fingers brushed a saddle girth, then stilled. "I used to think if I kept moving, the past couldn't follow," she said, "but it always knows where to find me." "Is it still following you?" She met his eyes, "Not on foot, but in my sleep." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Tell me what happened." She shook her head. "Not yet." "That's all right," he said. "I'll be here when you're ready." She looked at him like he'd said something impossible. The next morning, Luther found Valor stacking small stones behind the henhouse. The boy looked up and grinned, dirt on his cheeks, and held up a pebble like it was treasure. "Find something good?" Luther asked, crouching beside him. "Rock," the boy said. "Sure is." He took the stone and turned it in his fingers. "Might be a lucky one." Valor nodded solemnly and pressed it into Luther's palm. "Yours." He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Roseanna stepped out from the kitchen with a tin cup in her hand. "He insisted on carrying that rock all morning," she said. "Wouldn't let me throw it out. He gave it to me." Her expression softened, eyes quiet. "He knows who's worth holding on to." Luther stayed late that day, helped mend a broken water trough, then sharpened the widow's kitchen knives on the porch. Roseanna sat nearby, stitching a torn collar. Neither said much, but the silence between them had grown easy. Just before dusk, she set her sewing aside. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice low. "About staying." He looked up, not just for work, for good. He set down the knife. "You sure?" "I think so. Valor's calm here. I can sleep again. That means something. You've got a life here now." "I might," she said, "if you're part of it." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached down and took her hand, calloused meeting calloused. "I want to be," he said. Then Valor came toddling out of the house, dragging his blanket behind him, and Luther stood and scooped him up without thinking. The boy tucked his head into his neck and sighed. Roseanna watched them both, then whispered, "He was right that first day." Luther looked over. "You are his father in every way that matters." He didn't need to answer. The boy asleep against his chest was answer enough. The wind had shifted by late August, carrying with it the first breath of autumn. Leaves clung tighter to the cottonwoods lining the creek north of the widow's homestead, their green dulled at the edges. Luther stood ankle-deep in the shallows with his boots off and trousers rolled, helping Valor balance on a smooth rock. The boy was fascinated with the water spiders, pointing and babbling in a language half his own invention. Roseanna sat nearby on the bank, mending one of Valor's shirts. Her hair was pinned up tighter than usual, and her hands moved with quiet focus across the cloth. She did not look up when she spoke. "He's been sleeping through the night." Luther nodded, steadying the child with one hand. "He's settling, knows he's safe now. You think that's what it is?" "I do." Her needle paused. "I didn't think I'd be able to make a life again." "Not without hiding." "You're not hiding here, I know." She pulled the needle through with a slow breath. "And that's the strange part. I feel more myself now than I did before everything happened." Valor crouched and splashed, laughing as the water fanned out around his feet. Luther lifted him before he could slip, holding him high until the boy's giggles rattled the cottonwoods. "You ever want your own?" Roseanna asked, folding the mended shirt. Luther blinked. "Children," she glanced over. "A family." He set Valor down gently on the grass and wiped the boy's wet toes with a kerchief. "I used to think about it, back when I was young enough to believe I'd be any good at it." "You are." He looked up sharply. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it for your sake," she said. "I'm saying it for mine. I've spent enough of my life trying to make men feel bigger than they are. That's not what this is." Luther sat back, elbows on his knees. "You're not afraid of much, are you?" "I'm afraid of losing what I've just found," she said simply. "But fears never stopped me. It just slows me down." He smiled, faint and real. "You've got more grit than any man I've ever met." "You think I'm trying to impress you?" "No," he said. "That's what I like about you." Valor climbed into Roseanna's lap, the shirt forgotten as he nestled against her. She looked down at him for a long moment, then reached for Luther's hand. "I want to build something here," she said. "Not just survive." He threaded his fingers through hers. "Then let's build it." That evening, Luther rode into town alone. The lanterns in the mercantile windows burned low, and the noise from the saloon spilled out into the street music. Boots on floorboards, too loud laughter. He didn't stop. He tied his horse outside Mies and knocked at the back door. She answered with flour on her apron and one brow lifted. "Didn't expect you tonight. I need to ask something." Mies stepped aside to let him in. "Then ask." He stood there, hat in his hand, the stove warm behind him. "That little cabin out by the West Ridge still sound," she wiped her hands, "needs some roof work. Floor's solid. I want to fix it up." Mies studied him. "For her, for all three of us. You planning to marry her?" "Yes." Mies poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it over. "Then you take the cabin. I'll send my boy to help with the shingles." The next week passed in a blur of hammering and sawing and trips to the creek for smooth stones to line the hearth. Valor brought him nails in his tiny hands, solemn and proud, and Roseanna arrived each day with biscuits wrapped in cloth and a look in her eye that made Luther forget anything had ever been broken in him. One afternoon, she stepped into the unfinished doorway, the sun behind her, arms crossed. "You're not doing this just for me, are you?" "No," he said. "I'm doing it because I want a place you can come home to." She took a slow breath. "Then you should know something before you ask me anything." He leaned his hammer against the sill. "I'm listening." "I wasn't just running from judgment," she said. "There was a man, a cousin of the ranch owner in Sweetwater. He cornered me after Valor was born, said I owed him something for taking up space. When I said no, he got mean. Told me no one would care what happened to a girl like me." Luther's hands curled into fists. "Where is he now?" "Gone. I got out before he could do worse, but I still remember his eyes." "You won't have to see them again or anything like them." She stepped forward. "I don't need you to fight for me." "I know," he said. "But I want to." She reached up, touched the side of his face. "I believe you." He kissed her there in the doorway, the half-built home around them, the wind carrying the scent of pine from the hills. And when Valor came toddling up with a stick in his hand and a grin wide as the sky, Roseanna laughed and whispered, "He's going to call you that name forever." Luther crouched to meet the boy's gaze. "I reckon I don't mind," he said. That night, Roseanna wrapped her fingers around his and said yes before he could even ask. And beneath the stars, with the cabin taking shape behind them and the ground firm beneath their feet, they began the life neither of them had believed they'd ever find. By the second week of September, the air had cooled enough that the mornings clung to mist. Luther woke early, as he always did, but now there was the quiet rustle of another body nearby, Roseanna's breath steady against his chest, one of her hands resting just above his ribs. Valor slept curled on a straw mattress laid near the hearth, blanket tangled around his knees. Luther held still a moment longer, watching the faint light shift through the chinked logs of their new cabin. He had never thought peace would come quiet like this. Outside, a crow called from the cottonwoods. He eased from the bed, careful not to wake her, and stepped out into the cold morning. The roof still needed another coat of pitch, and the smokehouse Me's boy had helped raise was waiting on a door. He hauled his tools into the yard and set to work, the sound of his hammer muffled by the fog. Later, Roseanna brought him a biscuit wrapped in linen and sat on the edge of the woodpile, her shawl tugged close. "You sleep all right?" he asked, checking the hinge fit. She nodded and pulled her knees up. "I had a dream I was back in Sweetwater, but the streets were empty and I wasn't afraid." He set down the hammer. "That sounds like a good dream." "It wasn't," she said. "It felt like I'd been forgotten." He stepped closer. "You ever feel that way here?" She shook her head, slow and sure. "Not once." She didn't say more and he didn't press. After a while, she stood and brushed off her skirt. "You ought to come into town with me," she said. "Why?" "I need to collect some sugar Me ordered for me." "You can carry the sack." He raised an eyebrow. "That the only reason?" "No," she said. "I want folks to see us together." He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded once and wiped his hands on a rag. "Let me get cleaned up." They rode double on his horse, Valor tucked between them in a sling Roseanna had sewn from an old flour sack. The boy kept patting Luther's hands where they rested on the reins, humming to himself. Bitter Creek was livelier than usual, with wagons parked along the road and a traveling merchant selling ribbons and combs from a pushcart. Roseanna stopped to look at a tin of lavender soap, her fingers hovering. "You want it?" Luther asked. "There's better ways to spend coin." He stepped forward and handed the merchant a silver piece. "Then let me waste it." She took the soap and held it to her nose, eyes closing. "Smells like my aunt's garden in Missouri," she murmured, "before the fever took her." They didn't speak of it again. At the mercantile, Me met them at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Heard you two finally settled in that cabin," she said. "I was beginning to think you liked sleeping under nails and sawdust." "It's home now," Roseanna said. "Good," Me replied. "You deserve one." On the ride back, Valor fell asleep against Luther's chest, fingers tangled in his coat. The sun broke through the clouds then, laying a soft gold across the wheatgrass. "You ever think about your brother?" Roseanna asked, her voice low. "Every day." Would he have liked Valor? Luther looked down at the boy's small face, slack with sleep. "He'd have built him a rocking horse and spoiled him rotten." She smiled faintly. "What was his name?" "Elias." She was quiet a moment. "Maybe we could use it someday." He looked over. "Someday, if we grow this family like we talked about." He didn't answer at first. Then, "Yeah, I'd like that." She reached over and rested her hand on his thigh. Back at the cabin, Luther laid Valor in his bedroll while Roseanna hung the sugar sack in the pantry. He watched her, the quiet way she moved, the steadiness in her shoulders. "I want to ask you something," he said. She turned. "All right." He stepped forward and took her hand. "I want to make this right, not just by living with you. I want to marry you proper. Church, ring, the whole thing." "If you'll have me." "Yes," she said. "You already know that." I still wanted to say it. She leaned into him, her voice a whisper. "Then let's do it before the frost comes." They kissed with the window open and the scent of pine drifting in. And when Valor stirred and called out, Luther went to him first. The boy reached up, still half asleep. "Dada," he mumbled. Luther lifted him without hesitation. "Right here, son." And none of it felt borrowed anymore. It felt like a life, their life. One they'd built from ash and dust, with hands that had known loss and now, finally, knew love. The first snow came early that year, a light dusting over the fields and cabin roof. Luther had just finished stacking split logs beneath the overhang when Roseanna opened the door with a wool shawl around her shoulders and Valor bundled in a blanket against her chest. The boy had grown heavier with the season, rounder in the face, and louder in his joys. He hummed as she bounced him lightly, his eyes following a jay that flitted from one bare branch to the next. "Church bell's been ringing since sunup," she said. "Reverend's expecting us." Luther brushed sawdust from his sleeves. "You still want to do it this way?" Her gaze didn't waver. "I want folks to witness it, not for their sake, for ours." The chapel in Bitter Creek was small, wood-framed and plain, with frost on the windows and a single row of pine boughs tied above the altar. Me had pressed a dress into Roseanna's hands that morning without ceremony cotton, soft blue, with mother-of-pearl buttons along the cuffs, and she wore it now with her hair pinned back and Valor on her hip. Luther met her at the front with his best coat on, collar brushed clean, boots polished as best he could manage. His hands twitched once, then steadied when she reached for him. "You nervous?" she asked under her breath. "Only if you are." Reverend Kane kept the ceremony short. The vows were spoken low and even without poetry. They didn't need it. When it was done, Me handed Valor to Luther with a gentle nod, and the boy beamed as if he'd known all along what they were doing. Outside, snow fell in slow flakes. Roseanna pulled her shawl tight and took Luther's arm as they walked back to the wagon. "You know," she said, "I never thought I'd wear a ring again." He glanced over. "You've been married before." "No," she said, "but I used to imagine it when I was younger." Then life got in the way. He watched her trace the edge of her sleeve. "I'd never pictured it for myself, not until you." They rode home with Valor asleep in Roseanna's lap, the rhythm of the wagon wheels steady over frozen ground. That night, Roseanna laid the boy in his pallet and turned to Luther, her face half lit by the fire. "I've never known quiet like this," she said. He looked up from the wood stove. "You miss the noise." "I miss nothing," she said, stepping closer. "Not anymore." He reached for her, fingers resting at her waist, and she bent down to kiss him, slow and certain. The wind outside shifted, brushing snow off the cabin roof, and the fire popped low behind them. They lay together wrapped under quilts, her head on his chest, her breath warm at his collarbone. "Tell me something true," she whispered. He didn't hesitate. "I'd go through every hard mile again if it meant finding you at the end." She traced a line across his shoulder. "Then I'd walk them right beside you." In the months that followed, the snow deepened and the cabin walls thickened with warmth. Roseanna's stitching brought in coin from town, and Luther took odd jobs repairing harnesses and doors. They planted a winter garden beneath glass panes salvaged from a neighbor's wagon house. Valor began to speak in full sentences, trailing Luther with questions about birds and wood, and why the stars changed place each night. By spring, the cottonwoods at the creek had budded out, and Roseanna stood by the cabin window in a dress she'd made herself, one hand resting just above her stomach. "Reckon I'll need to let out the seams by June," she said. Luther stood from the table and crossed the room to her. He laid a palm over hers, feeling the faintest swell beneath her fingers. "Another little one," he said softly. She leaned into him. "I think it's time we gave Valor that rocking horse." He built it slow over the next few weeks, shaping it from pine and sanding it smooth each night after supper. Valor watched, eyes wide, but kept his hands to himself until it was done. The day Luther set it in the yard, the boy climbed on and laughed so hard he had to lean against Roseanna to catch his breath. "It's like flying," he said. Roseanna looked at Luther, sunlight in her eyes. "You gave him wings, and you gave me roots," he said. That summer, they built a second room onto the house with windows facing the hills. Roseanna filled it with quilts and baskets, and Luther carved a cradle from juniper wood. Me visited once a week, staying long enough to teach Valor his letters and scold Luther for tracking dirt past the threshold. One evening, as the sun sank low and the shadows turned long and blue, Roseanna stood barefoot in the garden, her belly round beneath her apron. Luther came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "You still sure about this life?" he asked. She turned her head just enough to kiss his cheek. I've never been more certain of anything. Valor chased fireflies across the yard, his laughter carrying on the breeze. Luther kissed her temple. Looks like peace found us after all. No, she said. We found it and we held on. Inside, the cradle waited. Outside, the sky stretched wide and clean. And for the first time in either of their lives, the world felt just wide enough for joy.